In this presentation, we will discuss joint costs of fundraising related to a non-governmental, not-for-profit, a non-governmental NFP. Joint costs of fundraising. Not-for-profits can conduct activities that have both a program or administrative activity and fundraising. Joint costs of these activities need to be allocated. So in other words, you'll recall that we're recording the expenses primarily by function, by activity, by what they're basically used for rather than by nature. If we report by nature, then we would just simply report utilities or the telephone expense and so on and so forth. If we're reporting by function, if we have to report by function, then there's going to be a question as to these types of activities that may have two things involved. If it has two things that are combined together in some way, such as program or administrative type of activities being combined with fundraising activities, the question, of course, then is how do we report these? Is there some general rule that we should report them in one specific function, or can we report them in multiple functions, considering it's the same activity, and we have to, if we do decide to report them in multiple functions, then we have the problem of how are we going to allocate this information to multiple types of functions. So here's going to be the FASB guidelines for allocating joint costs. The total cost of activities that include a fundraising appeal should be reported as fundraising costs unless bona fide program or management and general function has been conducted in conjunction with the appeal for funds. So in essence, the default would be fundraising. If you got like fundraising and something else, the default then would be fundraising, unless there's going to be a significant component of it that's going to be going to the general function or some program. So let's read that one more time. The total cost of activities that includes a fundraising appeal should be reported as fundraising costs unless a bona fide program or management and general function has been conducted in conjunction with appeal for funds. So that's going to be the default. Next, the joint costs of a bona fide program or management and general function should be allocated between the bona fide function and fundraising using an equitable allocation base. So then it's going to say, hey, if you have to allocate it between the two items, between fundraising and program or fundraising and management and general, then you have to use some type of allocation base, because obviously if it's the same kind of event that we had, expenses, we're going to have to use some kind of method to allocate between the two. Oftentimes, we're going to use some type of allocation base to come up with percentages that we can then use the percentages, of course, to allocate between the applicable programs and or fundraising and or general and administrative. Criteria of purpose, audience, and content must be met in order to conclude that a bona fide program or management and general function has been conducted in conjunction with the appeal for funds. In other words, if we have basically an appeal for funds, that's kind of the default setting. In order for us to prove that there's some other item that we're going to be allocating it to, whether that be a program or management and general, this criteria must be met. Criteria of purpose, audience, and content. So what does that mean? Criteria of purpose, audit, and audience and content. We'll take a look at that in more depth now. Here are the criteria. First, purpose. The criteria of purpose, one of the criteria that would need to be met in order for us to say that we don't just have fundraising but are allocating also to program and or general and administrative. The purpose then, the joint activity helps accomplish a program purpose or a management activity. So whatever we're looking at, it has to have something, the joint activity has to have something that will help accomplish the program purpose. Basically, that's going to be one of kind of the objectives of the not-for-profit organization or a management activity. In terms of audience, the audience was selected primarily for a program or management purpose rather than ability to make a donation. So when we think about the audience, was the audience put together simply so that we can basically have fundraising to get a donation? Or was the audience put together primarily for a program or management purpose? Program purpose or management purpose, why is the audience there? Then we have content. The joint activity motivates the audience to action in furtherance of the mission or meets a management responsibility. So what's the content that's going to be involved? Is it motivating us towards the mission of the organization? Basically kind of more of a program type function, or towards some kind of management responsibility that is necessary Or is it simply the content is generally for fundraising?